No warning, no trial, no compensation. One morning, a European government walked into a thriving billion-dollar Chinese company and simply took it. Not with soldiers, not with sanctions, with a signature and a law written during the Cold War. What happened next will change how every country on Earth thinks about foreign investment forever. There's a war happening right now that you won't see on any battlefield. No explosions, no uniforms, just clean rooms, silicon wafers, and governments making moves that are reshaping the entire global economy. Quietly, strategically, and, honestly, faster than most people realize. And the latest move? It just happened in Western Europe, in a country most people associate with tulips, windmills, and a relaxed way of life. The Netherlands just did something so bold, so calculated, and, many would argue, so legally disturbing that boardrooms from Beijing to Brussels are still processing the shock. Here's what happened. A Chinese-owned semiconductor company, fully legal, fully compliant, paying its taxes, employing thousands of workers, supplying chips to Tesla, Apple, and Volkswagen, had its assets frozen overnight. Its Chinese management was removed. Its billion-dollar intellectual property was locked away, and its ownership was transferred to a government-appointed custodian without a single euro in compensation. The company is called Nexperia, and if you've never heard that name before today, that's about to change. Because what just happened to it is one of the most significant moments in the global semiconductor war, and almost nobody is talking about it properly. So let's fix that. Before we get into the details of what happened to Nexperia, you need to understand why this matters so deeply. Semiconductors, chips, are the foundation of modern civilization. Your phone, your car, the hospital equipment keeping someone alive, the satellites orbiting the Earth, all of it depends on chips. Whoever controls chip production controls the infrastructure of the modern world. That's not a metaphor. That is the economic and geopolitical reality of 2025. For decades, the United States sat comfortably at the top of that hierarchy. American companies designed the best chips. American allies built the machines that made them. It was an ecosystem so deeply interlocked that it seemed untouchable. Then China started catching up, fast. By 2025, China's semiconductor self-sufficiency rate had climbed to approximately 45%. In the memory chip sector, domestic equipment now accounts for around 40% of the market. Chinese companies aren't just assembling chips designed elsewhere anymore. They are designing, testing, and manufacturing their own. And here's where things get genuinely fascinating. For years, the Western strategy to contain China's chip ambitions rested on one assumption: keep China away from EUV lithography machines, the ultra-advanced equipment needed to manufacture the world's most cutting-edge chips, and you keep them a decade behind. ASML, the Dutch company that is the only manufacturer of EUV machines on the planet, became the central piece on this geopolitical chessboard. But China didn't wait for permission. Engineers at SMICS, China's leading chip maker, developed a workaround using older DUV machines combined with a technique called multiple exposure patterning. It's slower, more complex, and requires extraordinary precision. But it worked. SMIC achieved a genuine breakthrough at the 5-nanometer process node, something Western analysts had called flat-out impossible without EUV technology. The wall the West built had a crack in it, and in the semiconductor world, a crack has a way of becoming a door. One American industry publication noted that if China maintains its current trajectory, its share of the global AI chip market could rise from under 10% today to as high as 35% by 2030. That would fundamentally alter the balance of power in artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and autonomous vehicles. Washington noticed, and the response was swift. In October 2023, the US government issued sweeping export controls blocking American companies. And any company using American technology anywhere in its supply chain, from selling advanced chips and chip-making equipment to Chinese firms. SMIC, YMTC, and dozens of others were suddenly cut off from critical global tools. The immediate impact was real. SMIC's production timelines were disrupted by 3 to 6 months. By 2025, the U.S. Entity List, the government's official blacklist, had expanded dramatically, targeting key AI chip companies like Cambricon. Even global cloud service providers were directed not to use Chinese chips to serve Chinese AI companies. Exports of NVIDIA's most powerful AI chips to China collapsed by roughly 70%. But here's the paradox: nobody in Washington seems to want to acknowledge. Every time the West has sanctioned a Chinese technology company, the result has been to accelerate China's investment in domestic alternatives. The Huawei restrictions accelerated China's 5G equipment manufacturing. The chip export controls pushed SMIC toward its DUV innovation. The Entity List drove Chinese AI companies to build their own chips from scratch. The sanctions meant to slow China down, keep waking it up. And now, the Netherlands has entered this fight, with a move against one specific company that reveals exactly how far Western governments are willing to go. Part 3. The company they came for. Nexperia's story begins more than 60 years ago, inside the semiconductor division of Philips, one of Europe's most iconic technology companies. Decade after decade, that division accumulated deep manufacturing expertise, precision engineering knowledge, and a library of intellectual property that, honestly, few companies in the world could match. In 2017, it separated from Philips, rebranded as Nexperia, and began operating independently under Dutch law. The company focused on what engineers called discrete devices, not the headline-grabbing AI accelerators that fill the news, but the fundamental building blocks without which almost no electronic product on Earth can function. Diodes, transistors, MOSFETs, logic chips, the quiet, essential components that make everything else work. In this space, Nexperia was genuinely world-class. Third globally in power discrete devices. Number 1 worldwide in ESD protection chips for automotive electronics. Its client list included Apple, Tesla, Volkswagen, and dozens of other top-tier companies with zero tolerance for supply chain failure. But beneath that impressive market position, a problem was quietly growing. Nexperia's investment in research and development was chronically low, consistently running at less than 5% of annual revenue. In an industry where the pace of technological change is relentless, that gap really mattered. The company was falling behind in next-generation technologies. Profit margins on its mature process chips were compressing. Squeezed between global giants like STMicroelectronics and Infineon, its global market share in discrete devices had slipped to around 14% by 2018. Profitable, respected, strategically vital, but running out of runway. That's when China arrived. Part 4. The largest chip deal in Chinese history. Around 2018, Wingtech Technology, one of China's leading electronics manufacturing groups, began acquiring shares in Nexperia. The initial purchase covered roughly 1/3 of the company. The following year, Wingtech invested further, pushing its stake to nearly 80%. And in 2020, it completed a full 100% acquisition for a total exceeding 33 billion Chinese yuan. At the time, it was the largest cross-border semiconductor acquisition in Chinese history. The strategic logic was crystal clear. China's electric vehicle industry was exploding. Companies like BYD, NIO, and Li Auto were scaling up at a pace that, honestly, staggered global observers. But there was a critical vulnerability at the heart of that growth story: automotive-grade chips. Every modern electric vehicle contains roughly 1,000 semiconductors on average. These chips must withstand extreme temperatures, vibration, and decades of continuous operation. They must pass years of qualification testing before a single automaker will approve them. The development cycle from initial design to mass production approval typically runs 3 to 5 years. Chinese domestic companies held less than 10% of the global automotive chip market. By acquiring Nexperia, China wasn't just buying a profitable business. It was purchasing 60 years of accumulated manufacturing expertise, a globally trusted brand embedded in the supply chains of the world's top automakers, and intellectual property assets that would have taken a decade or more to build from scratch. And the results were, honestly, remarkable. Under Chinese management, Nexperia's annual revenue reached approximately 2.36 billion euros. Its gross profit margin expanded from around 25% before the acquisition to a striking 42.4%. The company eliminated all historical debt, achieving what analysts describe as zero-debt operations. Over 5 years of Chinese ownership, Nexperia contributed roughly 30 million euros in corporate income tax to the Dutch government. A thriving company, a profitable asset, a model of what international investment is supposed to look like. By early 2025, analysts estimated Nexperia's total value at somewhere between 10 billion and 12.9 billion US dollars. Then September 30th arrived, and everything changed. Part 5. The day everything froze. On September 30th of this year, the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs made a move that, honestly, stunned the international business community. Without advance notice, without a public hearing, without the extended judicial process you would expect when a government moves against a major international corporation, the ministry invoked something called the Commodity Supply Act, a law originally written during the Cold War, designed for emergencies, for wartime, for hostile actors threatening public supply chains. The Dutch government used that law to issue a comprehensive asset freeze against Nexperia and all 30 of its global subsidiaries. The order was total. Nexperia was prohibited from adjusting any assets, transferring or licensing any intellectual property, conducting new business activities, or making any changes to its personnel structure. Everything, from R&D programs to manufacturing expansion to customer deliveries, was placed on indefinite hold. The practical consequences were immediate. At Nexperia's German manufacturing facility, approximately 2 million automotive chips, ready for delivery to clients including Tesla and Volkswagen, were sealed inside a warehouse. The orders existed. The chips had been produced, the logistics were arranged, but the freeze made every single one of them unshippable. 2 million chips, sitting idle because of a signature. The very next morning, a Dutch court, without completing a full judicial review, suspended Wingtech's management rights over the entire company. China's 99.99% ownership stake was transferred to an independent government-appointed custodian. Wingtech retained exactly one symbolic share. One share, out of billions. China had gone from full owner to symbolic bystander in less than 48 hours. And Nexperia's intellectual property, the accumulated product of 6 decades of engineering, was explicitly frozen, banned from being transferred or licensed to any Chinese entity under any circumstances. The Dutch government's official justification: national security, supply chain risk reduction. But here's the part that stopped international legal scholars cold. No specific security violation was alleged, no technology theft, no documented incident of misconduct, no concrete evidence of any actual harm. What the Dutch authorities offered instead was a general assertion that given Nexperia's Chinese ownership and its strategic importance, the potential for risk existed. You're not being accused of doing something wrong. You are being punished for the theoretical possibility that you might someday do something wrong. On that basis, a hypothetical risk, backed by no specific evidence, a 60-year-old company was seized from its legal owners without a single euro in compensation. One word kept appearing in the international legal commentary that followed: expropriation. So if it wasn't a specific security incident, what was really driving this decision? Let's follow 2 threads: the money and the geopolitics. The money first. Nexperia is valued at up to $12.9 billion US dollars. Its profit margins are running above 42%. Its automotive chip business is woven into the supply chains of, honestly, just about every major European and American car maker. By seizing control through a legal mechanism rather than a market transaction, the Dutch government effectively reclaimed a world-class semiconductor business without paying its owners a single cent. That's not an unintended side effect of the policy. It is the policy. Now let's talk about the geopolitics. The United States, through its CHIPS and Science Act, has been distributing billions in subsidies to allied nations, on one specific condition: alignment with Washington's strategy of restricting China's semiconductor access. The Netherlands received approximately $3 billion US dollars under this framework. Money like that comes with expectations. By 2025, the US had also introduced what insiders call the penetration rule, meaning that once a company is placed on the US entity list, all subsidiaries where it holds more than 50% ownership automatically fall under the same restrictions, regardless of where those subsidiaries are registered. Wingtech had already been added to the entity list by the end of 2024. The Dutch government's timing was not accidental. It was aligned. The action against Nexperia arrived at the precise moment it would serve as the clearest possible signal to Washington, a demonstration that the Netherlands was a committed partner in the technology containment strategy. For the Netherlands, the calculation was elegant and ruthless in equal measure: demonstrate solidarity with the US, reclaim a $10 billion asset at zero cost, weaken a critical link in China's automotive chip supply chain. At a moment when Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers are competing aggressively with European automakers across global markets. 3 objectives, 1 signature. But here's what they may have underestimated. China has not yet fully shown its hand. But the direction is unmistakable. Expect legal challenges. Wingtech has substantial grounds to contest the seizure under international investment protection frameworks, EU competition law, and bilateral trade agreements. The case will be long and expensive, but it forces the Dutch government to defend its actions in public, transparent legal forums, where the question of whether a theoretical risk justifies uncompensated expropriation will need a real answer. Expect accelerated domestic investment. Every major Western move against a Chinese technology company has produced the same result. China invests harder in domestic alternatives. The Huawei sanctions built China's 5G industry. The chip restrictions built SMIC's DUV innovation capability. The Nexperia seizure will build China's domestic automotive chip sector, where companies like Star Power Semiconductor and BYD Semiconductor are already gaining ground. And expect this to fundamentally change how China thinks about investing abroad. For 2 decades, Chinese companies operating in Western markets largely believed that legal ownership, regulatory compliance, and genuine economic contribution would protect their investments. The Nexperia case destroys that assumption. If a fully compliant, tax-paying, legally operating company can be seized because its Chinese ownership has become politically inconvenient, then no Chinese-owned asset in any Western jurisdiction is truly secure. That realization will reshape Chinese outbound investment strategy for years to come. Here's the deeper irony that the architects of these policies seem to miss. The harder the West pushes, the faster China runs. The sanctions intended to keep China a decade behind in semiconductors have produced a SMIC 5 nanometer breakthrough. The entity list restrictions intended to cripple Chinese AI have produced a generation of domestic chip designers. The moves intended to contain China's technological rise have, consistently, underestimated China's capacity to adapt, innovate, and build around every obstacle placed in its path. Can the West stop China's semiconductor rise entirely? Based on 5 years of evidence, probably not. Not completely, not permanently. China graduates more engineers per year than any other nation. its government has made semiconductor self-sufficiency a top national priority. Its domestic market provides demand at a scale that funds development cycles impossible in smaller economies. The 5-nanometer DUV breakthrough at SMIC carries one unmistakable message. We can innovate around your constraints. We will find another way. And history shows that once that mindset takes hold inside an industry, once the proof points start accumulating, the momentum becomes very hard to stop. Here's where we land. A company with 60 years of Dutch engineering heritage, grown into a global powerhouse under Chinese management, generating billions in annual revenue, employing thousands of workers, paying its taxes faithfully, serving the world's most demanding customers, was effectively seized by the government of its host country in 48 hours. No compensation, no trial, no specific allegation of wrongdoing. Just a Cold War law, a court order, and a political calculation. Whatever your position on the US-China technology competition, whatever you believe about national security and supply chain risk, it is difficult to look at what happened to Nexperia and not feel something shift inside you. Because the principle being established here is dangerous for everyone, not just Chinese companies, not just foreign investors in European markets, for anyone, anywhere, who believes that legal ownership, honest business conduct, and genuine economic contribution should be enough to protect what you've built. If ownership rights can be suspended whenever they become geopolitically inconvenient, then they were never really rights at all. Meanwhile, in laboratories and engineering offices across China, the response is already underway, not with outrage, with something far more consequential, focused, patient, systematic work, closing gaps, building alternatives, proving, one technical milestone at a time, that no blockade lasts forever. The semiconductor war is far from over. The most important chapters haven't been written yet. But one thing is already certain. The world that comes out the other side of this conflict will look nothing like the one that entered it. And the countries and companies that chose wisdom over short-term political calculation, those are the ones history will remember well. A $10 billion company changed hands without a single cent. The chip war just entered a new phase, and the whole world is watching. If this story made you think, if it connected dots you hadn't connected before, then this channel was built exactly for you. Every week, we go beneath the surface of the headlines. We cover the semiconductor race, the geopolitical shifts, the technology battles, and the economic forces that are quietly rewriting the rules of the world we live in. Stories that matter, told the way they deserve to be told. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join a community of people who don't just want to follow the news, they want to understand it. The Nexperia story isn't over, and neither is ours. See you in the next one.